I stood in the middle of my new living room, running my hand across the marble countertop I had dreamed about for years. The sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow on hardwood floors that had taken every penny of my savings. After 10 years of grinding, I finally owned something substantial, something real. I hoped hosting the family reunion here would finally earn me the recognition I had always craved. Then I heard the front door open. My sister Amanda walked in surveying my $850,000 dream with a smirk that made my stomach knot. Before I tell you how my family tried to steal my house right under my nose, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And if you ever had family members who felt entitled to your success, hit that subscribe button because this story might sound familiar. Growing up as the youngest in my family was never easy. From my earliest memories, there was always an unspoken hierarchy with my sister Amanda perched firmly at the top. While most parents try to hide their favoritism, mine displayed it like a banner. Amanda was their golden child. Her artwork adorned every inch of refrigerator space. Her academic achievements, no matter how minor, warranted celebration dinners. Her softball games were family events that required attendance from everyone, including distant relatives who barely knew my name. Meanwhile, my achievements seemed to evaporate into thin air. When I made honor roll 4 years straight in high school, my father merely nodded and said, "That is what we expect." When I won the state science competition, my mother glanced at the trophy and asked if I had taken out the trash. It was as if I existed in a parallel universe where my accomplishments were invisible, or worse expected, without acknowledgement. Christmas mornings were particularly revealing. Amanda would receive thoughtful, expensive gifts that aligned perfectly with her interests. I would get practical items, like socks or school supplies. One year, she received a brand new laptop for her photography hobby, while I got a calculator for my advanced math classes. The disparity was so obvious that even our neighbors noticed, though they never said anything directly to my parents. Family dinners were another battlefield. Amanda would dominate conversations, interrupting freely, while my parents hung on her every word. If I tried to share something about my day or accomplishments, I would be cut off or met with disinterest. Eventually, I stopped trying to compete for attention and sat silently becoming the family ghost. By 18, I had accepted my place in the family dynamic and was ready for escape. Unlike Amanda, who had her entire college education paid for at an expensive private university, I had to piece together scholarships, loans, and work multiple jobs to attend a state college. My parents claimed they had exhausted their education fund on Amanda, though they somehow found money to fund her semester abroad in Paris. College life was a brutal adjustment. While other freshmen were joining clubs and attending parties, I was working 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore, another 15 at a local restaurant, and still barely making ends meet. I lived in the cheapest dorm available, ate ramen more often than not, and spent holidays alone because I could not afford to travel home. Not that home felt much like home anymore. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, I thrived academically. I double majored in computer science and business understanding, early that financial independence would be my only path to freedom. I graduated with honors, though my graduation ceremony was attended only by my roommate. My parents had a flimsy excuse about Amanda needing help moving into her new apartment that same weekend. After college, I landed an entry-level job at a tech startup. The pay was modest, but the potential for growth was enormous. I lived in a tiny studio apartment with furniture salvaged from curbs and thrift stores. Every penny that did not go towards student loans or rent went into savings. I had a goal, though. At that point, it was still somewhat nebulous. I just knew I needed financial security to avoid ever feeling as powerless as I had growing up. Over the next 8 years, I climbed steadily through the ranks of the tech world. I switched companies twice for better opportunities, each time increasing my salary and responsibilities. By 30, I was leading a development team and making six figures. My student loans were finally paid off, and my savings account was growing at a pace that surprised even me. Still, I lived frugally, driving the same used car I had bought after college and living in a one-bedroom apartment that cost far less than what I could afford. During these years, my relationship with my family grew increasingly distant and strained. Phone calls home became rare, usually initiated by me, and lasting just long enough to exchange basic updates. Family gatherings were exercises in discomfort with my parents, focusing almost exclusively on Amanda, her successful career in marketing, her perfect boyfriend from a wealthy family, and her upcoming wedding plans. I would sit through these gatherings, smile at appropriate times, and leave as soon as it was socially acceptable. Amanda, meanwhile, continued to receive financial support from our parents well into adulthood. They helped with the down payment on her first condo, bought her a new car as a 30th birthday present, and were planning to contribute substantially to her wedding. When I purchased my first car entirely on my own, my father asked why I had not consulted him first, as if I had somehow overstepped by making an independent decision. I gradually came to terms with the fact that I would never be a priority for my parents. It hurt, but it was also liberating in a way. I stopped seeking their approval and focused instead on building a life that made me proud. I developed close friendships, found mentors in my industry who genuinely supported my growth, and created a chosen family of people who valued me for who I was. Then last year, something unexpected happened. While browsing real estate listings out of curiosity, I stumbled upon a house that stopped me in my tracks. It was in an upscale neighborhood, a beautiful two-story colonial with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees in the yard. The listing price was $850,000, far more than I had planned to spend, but something about the house called to me. It represented everything I had worked for, a tangible symbol of success that even my parents could not ignore. I scheduled a viewing, telling myself it was just to satisfy my curiosity. But walking through those rooms, I felt something I had rarely experienced, a sense of belonging. The house needed some updates, but its bones were solid. The spacious kitchen opened to a family room with a fireplace. The master bedroom had windows overlooking a private backyard with enough space for a garden. I could envision a future there, hosting dinner parties for friends, perhaps even starting a family someday. Before I left the viewing, I told the realtor I wanted to make an offer. She seemed surprised, as the house had only been on the market for 2 days, but quickly helped me prepare the paperwork. I offered $760,000, expecting a counteroffer. To my surprise, the sellers accepted. They needed to move quickly for a job relocation and appreciated that I could close without contingencies due to my strong financial position. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of inspections, paperwork, and planning. I liquidated a significant portion of my investments for the down payment and secured a mortgage for the rest. Each step of the process felt surreal, as if I was playing at adulthood rather than actually purchasing a house worth nearly $1 million. The day I signed the final papers and received the keys, I stood alone in the empty house, overcome with emotion. This was mine. After a lifetime of feeling like I did not belong anywhere, I had created a place for myself. I called my parents that evening to share the news, expecting at least mild congratulations. Instead, my mother sounded distracted and quickly changed the subject to Amanda's wedding venue search. My father asked a few questions about the price and location, then remarked that it seemed expensive for a first home. Their reaction stung, but did not surprise me. I decided then that I would host the annual family reunion traditionally held at my parents' house at my new home instead. Perhaps seeing the house in person would finally make them recognize what I had accomplished on my own. It was a naive hope, but one I could not quite let go of. The weeks leading up to the family reunion were filled with frantic preparation. I wanted everything to be perfect. I purchased new furniture, had the hardwood floors refinished, painted every room, and upgraded the kitchen appliances. I hired landscapers to transform the overgrown yard into a showcase complete with a patio perfect for outdoor entertaining. The cost was substantial, but I viewed it as an investment in both the property and, foolishly, in finally gaining my family's approval. I spent the day before the reunion grocery shopping, preparing food, and making final adjustments to the house. Everything had to be perfect. I wanted nothing to give my family, especially my parents, any reason to criticize. The dining table was set with new china and crystal glasses. Fresh flowers adorned every room. I even hung family photos throughout the house, including several of Amanda, hoping to create a sense of welcome and nostalgia. That evening, I received a text from Amanda saying she would arrive early the next morning to help me prepare. I was surprised by the offer, as Amanda had never shown interest in helping with family functions before. Still, I welcomed the gesture, hoping it signaled a shift in our relationship. Perhaps as adults, we could finally move beyond the competitive dynamic our parents had fostered. Amanda arrived at 9 the next morning, 3 hours before the rest of the family was expected. I greeted her at the door with genuine enthusiasm, eager to show her around my new home. She stepped inside designer sunglasses, pushed up on her head, and slowly surveyed the foyer and living room. Her expression was hard to read, but something in her eyes made me uneasy. "So this is what $760,000 buys these days," she said, running a finger along the back of my new sofa. "I thought it would be bigger, honestly." I swallowed my initial reaction and offered to give her a tour. As we walked through each room, her comments grew increasingly critical. The kitchen was nice, but lacked the double ovens she would have chosen. The master bedroom was smaller than hers. The guest bathrooms needed updating. With each criticism, my heart sank a little further. I had hoped naively, perhaps, that she would be happy for me. After the tour, Amanda pulled out her phone and made a call while I organized the drinks for the party. I tried not to eavesdrop, but it was impossible not to hear her telling someone, presumably our father, about the house. She kept her voice low, but phrases like "smaller than expected" and "needs a lot of work" drifted over to me. I pretended not to notice when she ended the call. "Dad and Mom will be here soon," she announced, dropping her phone into her designer purse. "They cannot wait to see the place." Then she looked directly at me, a strange smile playing at her lips. "You know, I have been talking to Dad about this neighborhood for ages. There is actually a house just down the street that Jackson and I looked at for after the wedding." I nodded politely, though something about her tone put me on edge. Jackson was her fiancé, a corporate lawyer from a wealthy family who seemed perpetually unimpressed with everything, especially me. "It is funny," she continued, wandering to the bay window in the living room. "This house looks so familiar. I swear Dad and I drove past it a few months ago when we were house hunting for my wedding gift." My hand froze on the glass I was filling. "Wedding gift?" Amanda turned to me, that same unsettling smile on her face. "Did not Dad tell you he promised to help us buy our first house as a wedding present? Something in this exact neighborhood, actually." Before I could respond, she walked over to the mantel where I had placed a family photo from Christmas several years ago. "This house is perfect for entertaining. Jackson and I would host amazing dinner parties here." She spoke as if the house was already hers, as if my presence was temporary. "Amanda," I started carefully, "I bought this house. It is mine." She laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Booth, you always were so literal." She looked around again, her gaze calculating. "Dad promised this as my wedding gift, you know. This exact house. We drove by it together, and he said he would make it happen." I felt like the floor was tilting beneath my feet. That is impossible. The house was only on the market for 2 days before I made an offer. "Well, Dad has connections," she replied with a shrug. "He was probably just waiting for the right moment to approach the owners. Then you swooped in and complicated everything." The doorbell rang before I could respond. Amanda glided to the door and opened it to reveal our parents, both dressed as if attending a country club function rather than a family gathering. My mother immediately embraced Amanda, while my father surveyed the foyer with the same critical eye his daughter had used earlier. "Booth," my father said, extending his hand for a formal handshake rather than the hug he had just given my sister. "So this is the place you jumped on without consulting anyone." His choice of words sent another wave of unease through me. Behind my parents, I could see more family members arriving, aunts and uncles and cousins parking along the street and making their way to the front door. "Dad was just telling me on the phone how surprised he was when you bought this place," Amanda said loudly enough for the arriving relatives to hear, especially since we had been looking at it for my wedding present. My Uncle Tom, my father's older brother, raised an eyebrow as he stepped into the now crowded foyer. "Is that right, Richard?" he asked my father. "You were planning to buy this house for Amanda." My father nodded, placing a hand on Amanda's shoulder. "We had discussed it. This neighborhood has excellent investment potential, and with Jackson's career taking off, it made sense to get them established in the right area." I stood frozen watching as my home was being discussed, as if I had no claim to it. More relatives arrived, filling the living room and kitchen, their curious eyes taking in both the house and the tension that was becoming increasingly palpable. "You really think this is your place?" My father laughed, looking directly at me after I mentioned the amount I had paid for the house. His voice had that familiar, dismissive tone I had heard throughout my childhood. "You do not belong here," he added, gesturing around at the high ceilings and crown molding. "This neighborhood is for established families, not tech workers who got lucky with some stock options." The room fell uncomfortably silent. Some of my relatives looked away, embarrassed by my father's blatant cruelty. Others seemed to be waiting for my response with morbid curiosity. Amanda broke the silence. "Do not worry, Booth. You can probably sell it without losing too much. Property in this area holds its value fairly well." She turned to the gathered family members. "Jackson and I were thinking we would renovate the kitchen first thing, open it up completely to the living area, and add a wine room where that small office is now. The guest bedroom upstairs would make a perfect nursery," my mother added further, cementing the fantasy that this house would soon belong to Amanda. "The morning light in there is just beautiful." I watched in disbelief as they continued planning changes to my home, discussing wall colors and fixture upgrades as if I was invisible. My younger cousins were sent out to the backyard to play supervised by an aunt. My uncle's wife began arranging the food I had prepared on the dining table. The family reunion was proceeding as if I was merely the venue, not the host. I was thinking my father said loudly, commanding the room's attention, that we could make this transition easy for everyone. Booth could sell the house to us at his purchase price. No harm, no foul. Then Amanda and Jackson can begin their renovations before the wedding. Several relatives nodded, as if this was a perfectly reasonable suggestion. My Aunt Patricia even added, "That seems fair. Family should help family." I felt a crushing pressure in my chest. This house represented every extra hour I had worked, every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had deferred to achieve financial security. And now my family was trying to take it from me, repackaging their greed as a favor to me. I stood silently in my kitchen, watching my family take over my home. Aunt Linda was rearranging my carefully selected serving platters. Uncle David was examining the backyard, as if assessing its potential for Amanda's future garden. My younger cousins were racing up and down the stairs, their shoes marking the hardwood I had just had refinished. And at the center of it all, my father, mother, and Amanda stood in a tight circle, still discussing renovations and neighborhood property values. In that moment, every slight, every dismissal, every instance of favoritism I had experienced throughout my life crystallized into perfect clarity. This was not a new behavior. It was merely the most egregious example of a pattern that had defined my entire relationship with my family. They had never seen me as an equal, as someone deserving of respect or recognition, and they never would unless I forced them to. With a calm I did not entirely feel, I walked to the study off the living room, aware of several pairs of eyes tracking my movement. I opened the top drawer of my desk and removed a folder containing the closing documents for the house. I took out my phone, opened the camera app, and took clear photos of the deed with my name prominently displayed as the sole owner. Then I opened a group text with my parents and Amanda and sent the images without comment. Within seconds, I heard the distinctive ping of incoming messages from the living room. My father pulled out his phone first, his expression changing from confusion to something approaching alarm as he looked at the screen. Amanda grabbed her own phone, scrolled through the images, then looked up at me with narrowed eyes. My mother leaned in to look at my father's screen, her practiced smile faltering. I walked back into the living room, folder in hand, and faced them. The room had grown quiet again, the tension palpable. My father cleared his throat, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Well, paperwork aside, we need to discuss what is best for the family as a whole," he said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he had used throughout my childhood when delivering final verdicts on matters large and small. "This neighborhood has always been part of our plan for Amanda and Jackson. Their children, your future nieces and nephews, Booth should grow up in a community like this. The family legacy is important," my mother added, touching my arm in a rare gesture of physical contact. "Your sister's wedding is just the beginning of the next chapter for all of us." Amanda stepped forward, her expression now a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You knew Dad promised me a house in this neighborhood. You must have known. Is that why you rushed to buy it, to spite me?" The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. "I had no idea Dad had promised you anything. I bought this house because I worked hard for 10 years to be able to afford it. I saved, invested, took risks, and earned every penny that went into the down payment. But family should come first." My father insisted, his voice rising slightly. "Your sister is getting married. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. And my home purchase was not," I countered, surprising myself with my steady voice. "Besides, if family comes first, why am I just hearing about this promise now? Why was I not included in any discussions about property in this neighborhood?" My Uncle Tom, who had been watching the exchange with growing interest, suddenly chuckled. "Richard, is this like that cabin by the lake you promised me back in the 90s? The one you ended up selling to the Hendersons without telling me?" My father's face flushed. "That was different, Tom. This is about Amanda's future. Or is it like the boat you promised to buy with Cousin Steve, but then backed out when a better deal came along?" Uncle Tom continued, seemingly enjoying my father's discomfort. "You do have a habit of making promises about property you do not actually own." A few other relatives shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. My cousin Jessica spoke up from where she sat on the window seat. "He promised me I could use his vacation timeshare for my honeymoon, then rented it out that week instead." She looked at me with newfound solidarity. I ended up having to scramble for last-minute reservations. One by one, stories emerged from various family members about promises my father had made and broken regarding property investments and financial support. With each new example, the united front my parents and sister had presented began to crack. Some relatives were now looking at me with sympathy rather than judgment. "None of that is relevant to the current situation," my father said dismissively, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "The point is, this house would be perfect for Amanda and Jackson." "The point is," I replied, opening the folder to reveal the deed and mortgage documents, "that this is my house. I own it legally. I paid for it with my own money. I did not receive help from anyone, nor did I expect it. I looked directly at Amanda. I am sorry if Dad made promises he could not keep. That must be disappointing. But it does not change the fact that this house is mine." My Aunt Patricia, who had earlier suggested I should sell the house to my parents, now looked thoughtful. "Richard, did you actually speak to the previous owners about buying this house for Amanda?" My father hesitated just long enough to answer the question, without words. "You did not, did you?" I said quietly. "You drove by, maybe pointed it out to Amanda, made some vague promise, but never took any actual steps to purchase it." "I was waiting for the right time," my father muttered, but the excuse sounded hollow even to my own ears. "I have documentation of every step of my purchase." I continued gaining confidence. "The initial offer, the acceptance, the inspection reports, the closing documents. I can also show you bank statements tracking every penny from my accounts to the title company." I looked around at my assembled relatives. "What I do not have is any obligation to give up my home because of a promise someone else made about property they did not own." Uncle Tom stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. "The boy is right, Richard. You cannot promise what is not yours to give. And Booth has clearly worked hard for this." He turned to address the room. "I say we celebrate his achievement instead of trying to take it from him. Is that not what family is supposed to do?" Several relatives nodded in agreement. My cousin Mark, who had remained quiet until now, raised his glass. To Booth and his new home, well earned. One by one, family members joined the toast, leaving my parents and Amanda standing awkwardly in the center of the room. Amanda's face was flushed with anger or embarrassment, possibly both. She grabbed her purse from the sofa. "Jackson and I will find something better anyway," she said, her voice brittle. "This place would require too many renovations to be truly suitable." She headed for the door without looking back. My mother hesitated, clearly torn between following her daughter and maintaining appearances at the family gathering. After a moment, she hurried after Amanda, calling her name in the conciliatory tone I had heard her use countless times when Amanda was upset. My father remained, though he had moved to the periphery of the room, suddenly less the center of attention than he was accustomed to being. I approached him directly, keeping my voice low. "I need you to acknowledge right now that this is my house, not yours to promise, not Amanda's future home mine. If you cannot do that, I have to ask you to leave." He looked at me with surprise, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years. After a long moment, he gave a curt nod. "Your house," he said simply. Then he turned and followed the path my mother and sister had taken, closing the front door firmly behind him. The family reunion continued, though, with a notably different atmosphere. Without my parents and Amanda present, many relatives seemed to relax, sharing stories and laughing more freely. Several approached me privately, expressing admiration for how I had handled the situation or sharing their own experiences with my father's manipulative tendencies. For perhaps the first time, I felt like I belonged in this family, connected by more than just shared DNA. She headed for the door without looking back. My mother hesitated, clearly torn between following her daughter and maintaining appearances at the family gathering. After a moment, she hurried after Amanda, calling her name in the conciliatory tone I had heard her use countless times when Amanda was upset. My father remained, though he had moved to the periphery of the room, suddenly less the center of attention than he was accustomed to being. I approached him directly, keeping my voice low. I did not hear from my parents or Amanda directly, though family gossip conveyed primarily through Uncle Tom's occasional phone calls informed me that Amanda and Jackson had purchased a house in a neighboring, equally expensive community. My father had indeed contributed significantly to their down payment, a fact that stung despite my new resolve not to seek his approval. The silence from my immediate family was both painful and liberating. For the first time in my life, I was not expending energy trying to earn love or recognition that had always been conditional at best. Instead, I focused on making my house truly my home. I planted a garden in the backyard, joined a neighborhood association, and hosted dinner parties for friends and colleagues who expressed genuine happiness for my success. At the recommendation of a close friend, I also began seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and childhood emotional neglect. These weekly sessions, were often difficult, forcing me to confront painful memories and recognize patterns I had normalized throughout my life. But they were also incredibly valuable, helping me understand that my parents' inability to love me unconditionally was their failing, not mine. I learned to identify and challenge the critical inner voice that sounded suspiciously like my father. I practiced setting boundaries in all my relationships, no longer accepting treatment that diminished my worth. I discovered that my people-pleasing tendencies and workaholic habits were deeply rooted in my desperate childhood need for validation, and began the slow work of building my self-worth from within rather than seeking it externally. 3 months after the family reunion, I received an unexpected text from Amanda asking if we could meet for coffee. My initial instinct was to decline to protect myself from further manipulation or criticism, but after discussing it with my therapist, I agreed to a brief meeting at a neutral location. Amanda arrived at the coffee shop looking less polished than usual, her designer handbag and perfect makeup replaced by a more casual appearance that reminded me of how she looked in high school before our parents' expectations had fully shaped her into their ideal daughter. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, fidgeting with her wedding ring. "I know things did not end well at your house." I nodded, but remained silent, a technique my therapist had suggested for difficult conversations. The silence seemed to unnerve Amanda, who was used to controlling social interactions. "I have been doing some thinking," she continued, when it became clear I was not going to make this easy for her, about us, about how Mom and Dad raised us. She took a deep breath. "I always knew they favored me. I think I even enjoyed it when we were kids. It made me feel special, superior." This level of self-awareness from Amanda surprised me, but I prompted when she paused. "But now, I can see how it hurt you, and how it was not actually good for me either." She looked directly at me, perhaps for the first time, seeing me as a person rather than a competitor or an obstacle. "They set us against each other from the beginning. Everything was a comparison, a competition. You could never win, and I could never lose, regardless of what either of us actually did or deserved." I felt an unexpected lump in my throat. That sounds about right. When Dad promised me that house, your house, I never questioned whether he had the right to promise it. I just assumed that whatever I wanted, he would make happen like he always has. She sighed. "I never thought about what it would be like for you working so hard for something and then having someone try to take it away. It was pretty awful," I admitted, "but not surprising given our history." Amanda nodded. "I talked to Uncle Tom last week. He told me some stories about Dad that I had never heard before, about promises he made to people and then broke when it was convenient, about how he has always used money and property to control people." She twisted her napkin between her fingers. "I am starting to realize I might be married to someone very similar." We talked for nearly 2 hours, unraveling the complex web of manipulation and conditional love that had defined our upbringing. It was not a perfect reconciliation by any means. Too much damage had been done for that. But it was a beginning, a fragile bridge between the isolated islands we had each inhabited within our family. Over the following year, I continued my therapy and gradually built a new kind of relationship with Amanda. We would never be the close siblings depicted in heartwarming family movies, but we developed a cautious respect for each other and a shared understanding of the dysfunctional dynamics that had shaped us. She came to my house occasionally, no longer with envy or entitlement, but as a guest who respected my space. My relationship with my parents remained distant. They made occasional overtures, usually around holidays or family events, but I maintained firm boundaries, engaging only when I felt emotionally strong enough to withstand their subtle manipulations. I had stopped expecting them to change or to suddenly recognize my worth. That acceptance, painful as it was, gave me freedom I had never known. The house that had been the catalyst for this family reckoning became my sanctuary. Each room I painted, each piece of furniture I carefully selected, each garden bed I planted, was an affirmation of my independence and self-worth. This was not just a property I owned. It was physical proof that I had built a life of value entirely on my own terms. More importantly, I had learned that home was not just a physical space, but a feeling of belonging within myself. I no longer needed external validation to know my worth. I had stopped giving others the power to determine where I belonged or what I deserved. On the one-year anniversary of moving into my house, I hosted a party for the friends and family members who had supported me throughout my journey. Uncle Tom gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes, celebrating not just my beautiful home, but the strength it took to claim my place in the world. As I look around my house now, I see not just the tangible results of my hard work, but also the intangible growth that came from standing my ground. I learned that sometimes the most valuable thing we can do for ourselves is to create boundaries that protect what we have built, even when those boundaries must extend to the people who should have been our greatest supporters. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who tried to take credit for or claim ownership of your success? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your own path. Remember, you define where you belong, not anyone else. Thank you for listening, and I hope my story helps you recognize and protect the value you bring to this world.